A man stands under a gray sky, drenched and shivering. The rain drips from his hair, soaks his coat, and pools at his feet. He checks his phone, no signal. His day has unraveled, and frustration hangs over him like the clouds above. Just steps away, a child in a yellow raincoat laughs and twirls in the same rain, her arms open to the sky. To people, one storm yet one suffers, while the other rejoices. Why? The rain is not the cause, it is simply rain. The difference lies in perception. This simple truth reflects something deeper, our fear of death. Like the storm, death is not cruel, it simply is. What causes suffering is not the fact of death, but our fear and judgment of it. Welcome to Stoic Dhamma. In this quiet space, we explore how ancient wisdom can help us live more freely by learning not to fear the inevitable, death. It waits at the edges of every conversation we avoid. It shapes our choices, even when we pretend it's not there. It hides behind career anxiety, fear of aging, jealousy, status obsession, even our inability to relax. In the modern world, we rarely confront it directly. Instead, we consume endless content, strive endlessly, stay busy, and label it all as ambition, productivity, or success. But underneath, for many, is the silent heartbeat of dread, that life might end before we've truly lived. And yet, death itself is not cruel. It is not a monster lurking in the shadows. It is simply a part of the cycle that includes birth, change, and decay. It is as natural as the sunrise and the setting of the moon. What creates fear is not the event of death, but our thinking about it. Our beliefs, stories, and judgments turn something natural into something terrifying. This is what the Stoics understood long ago. As Epictetus put it, it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. To understand the Stoic view more clearly, we must explore one of their core ideas, the dichotomy of control. According to this principle, there are two categories in life: things we can control and things we cannot. Our thoughts, actions, values, and choices belong to us. Everything else, other people, external events, the weather, the past, and death, does not. Trying to control what we cannot is like trying to stop the rain with our hands. It only leads to exhaustion and disappointment. Death belongs in the category of what we cannot control. It is inevitable, uncertain in timing, and universal. Trying to resist or escape it only creates anxiety. The Stoics, however, did not respond with despair. They met death with calm, sometimes even with gratitude. Why? Because once you stop fearing the end, you are finally free to begin. Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, reminded himself daily, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." This simple line does not ask us to be morbid. It invites us to be awake. What if death were not a thief, but a teacher? What if its presence helped us recognize the value of time not in years, but in moments? What if our fear of death was not a curse, but a signal pointing us to the parts of life we've been avoiding? The Stoics did not seek to escape death, but to understand it. And in doing so, they came closer to understanding life itself. Pause for a moment. Ask yourself gently, without judgment, are you truly living or just trying not to die? Are you moving through your days on autopilot, filling time, avoiding risk, trying to stay safe? Or are you present, grateful, awake, engaged? So much of modern life is designed around avoidance. We avoid discomfort, awkwardness, aging, silence, uncertainty. But life does not bloom in avoidance, it blooms in presence. And presence requires that we stop running from endings and start embracing them as part of the whole. Seneca, another Stoic writer, spoke often of death not to frighten, but to prepare. He wrote, "He who fears death will never do anything worth living for." For the Stoics, death was not the end of meaning, but the reason for it. Knowing that life ends gives it urgency. It brings focus. It invites courage. Without death, we might delay forever. With death, we must ask ourselves, what matters now? What would I say if I knew this moment might not come again? Death, in this way, becomes a compass. Not because it tells us where to go, but because it reminds us what's real. And yet, in our society, death is often hidden. We mask it with euphemisms, delay it with medical technology, and distract ourselves with entertainment. We fear it as a failure, rather than accept it as a return. The Stoics offer an alternative. Face it, speak of it. Reflect on it not morbidly, but meaningfully. In doing so, you reclaim your life from the grip of fear. Consider the rituals of other traditions. In Buddhist practice, monks meditate beside cremation grounds to understand impermanence. In Hindu thought, death is not the end but a transformation, a passage. In many indigenous cultures, death is a return to the earth, a continuation rather than a cut-off. Each of these echoes the Stoic insight that what disturbs us is not nature, but our separation from it. Death is not unnatural. Our denial of it is. So, we return to the beginning, the man in the rain and the child in the rain. The storm did not change, the water fell just the same, but one resisted and cursed it, while the other welcomed it as play. This is how fear of death can shape our lives, not by striking loudly, but by altering how we see each day. It makes us anxious, greedy, restless, disconnected. And yet, if we change our judgment, we change the entire experience. The rain is not the enemy, and neither is death. Let this be the beginning, not of dread, but of curiosity. What have you feared that might no longer need to be feared? What beliefs about death are you carrying, and are they serving you? You may not choose the timing of your end, but you can choose the meaning of your middle. The Stoics teach us that the greatest freedom is not in changing fate, but in changing our response to it, and so, we invite you to continue. In Part 2, we will walk alongside the ancient Stoics Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, not through their theories, but through their lived realities. These were not armchair philosophers, they were emperors, exiles, statesmen, and slaves. And all of them stood at the edge of mortality, not with fear, but with wisdom. Let's explore how. In the ancient world, death was not an abstract concept. It was close. Streets were filled with plague carts. Armies marched through cities. Life expectancy was short, and even emperors couldn't escape disease or betrayal. Philosophy wasn't a luxury, it was survival. It wasn't written in quiet gardens, but carved from the chaos of fire, blood, and impermanence. And from that landscape of uncertainty rose one of the clearest, calmest responses to death ever recorded: Stoicism. Epictetus was born into slavery, crippled from a young age, and owned by a powerful Roman bureaucrat. He had no wealth, no freedom, and for much of his early life, no control over his body. Yet from this bleak beginning emerged a voice of unshakable inner freedom. He famously said, "It's not death or pain that is to be feared, but the fear of death or pain." To Epictetus, death was just another event like sunrise or winter. Fear, however, was a judgment, a choice. Imagine what it meant for someone in his position to say that. Epictetus was not musing from comfort. His thoughts were shaped under pressure like iron forged in fire. When he spoke of dying without fear, he didn't mean being emotionless. He meant being free from the tyranny of what-ifs. From the stories we tell ourselves about how terrible it might be, he taught his students that our reactions, not the events themselves, hold the power to destroy or liberate us. In another corner of history, Marcus Aurelius sat in a military tent, writing by candlelight while plague and war ravaged his empire. He was emperor of Rome, the most powerful man on earth, yet his private writings, later titled Meditations, reveal a man who constantly reminded himself of his mortality. "You could leave life right now," he wrote. "Let that determine what you do and say and think." He didn't see death as an enemy, but as a teacher. Marcus Aurelius knew that power didn't protect him from loss. He lost children, friends, and health. And in the midst of such grief, he chose to reflect. not retreat. His stoicism wasn't theory, it was practice. A discipline that reminded him, what matters is not how long you live, but how clearly. He saw each day not as a promise, but as a gift, and he urged himself to meet it with purpose rather than fear. Seneca, another great Stoic, lived not in battlefields or slave quarters, but at the heart of Roman politics. He was wealthy, influential, and deeply embedded in the shifting powers of the imperial court. But his writings on death are among the most courageous and personal. He who fears death, he wrote, will never do anything worth living for Seneca, the fear of dying paralyzed the will to live fully. To cling to life is to shrink from it. His own death came by order of Nero, his former student. Given a choice to end his life by suicide, Seneca faced the moment calmly. He washed, gave his final words to friends, and opened his veins in a quiet farewell. This was not fatalism, it was faith in philosophy, in clarity, in the idea that death is not a defeat, but a transition. His life, and especially his end, echoed his teachings. To the Stoics, death was never the problem, it was as natural as breathing. What disturbed the soul was the way we distorted it, imagining death as evil, as punishment, as the end of everything that matters. This is where Stoicism parts ways with many fear-based belief systems. The Stoics did not need heaven or hell to justify living rightly. They believed the present moment, lived with integrity, was reason enough. Their central idea was this: events are neutral. Death, illness, betrayal, loss, these are not good or bad in themselves. They simply happen. What changes everything is how we interpret them. If death is the end, then we may see it as failure. But if death is part of the cycle, we may come to see it with calm acceptance. The Stoic path lies in shifting the lens, not the landscape. This view has deep echoes in other traditions. In Buddhism, impermanence is a fundamental truth. All conditioned things are impermanent, the Buddha said. Suffering arises when we try to hold onto what must pass. Death is not the crisis, attachment is. In Hinduism's Vedanic philosophy, death is seen as the shedding of the physical form, not the end of being. The true self, or Atman, continues unchanged by time or body. The Stoics didn't claim knowledge of an afterlife. In fact, many were agnostic about what comes after death, but they were confident in this. Worrying about it poisons the present. Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years, Marcus Aurelius warned. Life is now, you are alive now. Don't wait to live until you're dying. And this brings us to a quiet, yet profound insight. Death, by reminding us that time is limited, sharpens the edges of life. It gives urgency to meaning. When you accept the fragility of life, you stop wasting time on resentment, on vanity, on fear. You begin to ask better questions. How can I serve today? How can I love without condition? How can I let go? To fear death is to fear the very condition of life, that everything changes, that nothing lasts. But, as the Stoics saw it, this impermanence is not tragic. It is sacred. Without death, life would be vague and dull. It is precisely because it ends that each moment gleams with value. A flower blooms because it will wilt. A friendship deepens because it may not last forever. So, when the Stoics looked at death, they didn't look away. They looked right at it and said, "You are part of me." Their reflections, written in ink that still survives, invite us to do the same. To befriend mortality, to stop fighting time, to live in the clarity that only comes when you know you don't have forever. In the next part of our journey, we will explore how this wisdom can be applied, not just admired. How we can begin to loosen the grip of fear in our work, our relationships, and our inner lives, not by ignoring death, but by understanding it. Because when you fear death less, you live more. Fear of death doesn't always look like fear. It doesn't always show up as panic or dread. More often, it disguises itself. It hides beneath our busyness, our perfectionism, our endless need to be seen, loved, or successful. It whispers through questions like, am I doing enough? What if I fail? What if I waste my life? These aren't just concerns about time or achievement. At their root, they are anxieties about mortality, about meaning, about being forgotten, or never fully existing at all. This fear shapes our daily habits. It pushes us to overwork, to chase approval, to numb ourselves with distractions. We tell ourselves we're just trying to keep up, but often, we're just trying to outrun something deeper. The Stoics saw this clearly. They warned that the fear of death can quietly rob us of life not by ending it, but by diluting every moment with worrying. Life becomes something we manage, not something we experience. Let's begin with work. In many modern societies, work is more than a job, it's an identity. We measure worth in productivity, in hustle, in how busy we are, and beneath that urgency often lies a fear that if we slow down, we'll fall behind. That if we don't achieve enough, our lives won't matter. Epictetus would call this a false judgment. Your job is what you do, not who you are. He reminds us, you are not your role, but how you play it. This is where the Stoic principle of the dichotomy of control becomes vital. You control your effort, your integrity, your choice is not the outcome. If you write, paint, lead, teach, do it fully. But don't attach your peace to success or failure. That attachment, Epictetus says, is where suffering begins. When you do your work for the sake of virtue, not validation, you begin to free yourself from fear, even fear of being forgotten. In relationships, fear of death also takes subtle forms. We cling, we worry, we try to protect the people we love from all harm. And when we can't, we panic. But the Stoics never promised control over what we love. What they offered instead was presence. Marcus Aurelius wrote, when you kiss your child, say to yourself, tomorrow they may die, not to invite grief but to awaken gratitude. When we accept that nothing is guaranteed, we begin to cherish what is. Another tool the Stoics used was negative visualization. This practice means imagining loss not to depress you, but to make the present more vivid. Picture losing your partner, your job, your health. Then return to this moment. It hasn't happened. Not yet. You are here. The ones you love are here. And that clarity invites you to love deeper, to speak more honestly, to waste less time on irritation or ego. In our inner lives, fear of death can drive a deep restlessness. We feel like we must accomplish something great before time runs out. We fear living an average life, so we rush, compare, and chase. But Seneca would ask, are you living, or merely existing? In his letter on the shortness of life, he argued that life is not short, we just waste too much of it. We fear not death, but a life unlived. And we forget that meaning doesn't require grandeur, it requires attention. This is where the practice of daily reflection becomes essential. Each night, you pause and ask, did I live well today? Not was I perfect, or did I impress anyone? But simply, was I kind? Was I awake? Did I waste my time worrying? Or did I choose what matters? The fear of death begins to fade when we stop fearing ordinary days and start treating them as sacred. Practical Stoic techniques help bring this into focus. One is journaling. You write not to impress, but to understand. You ask, what did I fear today? Was it real or imagined? You begin to notice patterns, how often fear speaks in half-truths, how often it takes you out of the moment. Another technique is premeditatio malorum, quiet imagining of worst-case scenarios. Not to scare yourself, but to practice resilience. You imagine, then realize, even if that happened, you'd still have choices. The Stoic pause is another subtle but powerful habit. When fear rises before a difficult conversation, a decision, or an emotional trigger, you pause. You don't react immediately, you breathe. And in that space, you ask, is this within my control? That question becomes a compass. If the answer is no, you release it. If yes, you act with clarity. This one question can prevent hundreds of wasted reactions. Interestingly, These practices aren't just ancient wisdom, they echo modern psychology. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is rooted in the ideas of Epictetus. It teaches that thoughts shape feelings, and by changing your thoughts, you can change your emotional reality. You don't need to believe every fear your mind presents. You can examine it, test it, and choose a wiser thought. In this way, philosophy becomes not just reflection, but transformation. Let's return to a quiet moment. You're walking outside. The sky is clear, the air soft, nothing dramatic is happening, but everything feels alive. You're not thinking about tomorrow, or what you haven't done yet. You're here, listening, breathing. That moment, that simplicity is what the Stoics aim to preserve, not through denial, but through presence. They didn't want you to fear death, they wanted you to fear missing life. Because the fear of death is not just about the end. It's about time, about not having enough, about not being enough. But when you begin to see time not as something you lose, but as something you use, everything changes. You stop asking, "How much time do I have left?" and start asking, "How am I spending what I have?" That shift from fear to choice is the heart of Stoic practice. And when fear does come, as it sometimes will, you greet it not with shame, but with awareness. You remember, fear is not a command, it's a signal. It points to something you care about, something worth exploring, and often, when you look closer, you find that what you fear is not death itself, but the possibility of a life not fully lived. That is a fear you can do something about. So, we circle back to where we began, not with answers, but with awareness. Not with a promise of immortality, but with an invitation to wake up, to slow down, to live as if today matters because it does. Death may come later, but life is here now. What will you do with it? What are you really afraid of? Is it the end or the emptiness before the end? For many of us, the idea of death haunts us not because of the physical finality, but because of the quiet suspicion that we haven't really lived. We fear reaching the end with regrets, with unspoken words, unlived dreams, and unnoticed beauty. That's why the Stoics didn't obsess over death. They reflected on it daily, not to dwell on dying, but to awaken the urge to live more clearly, more courageously, more truthfully. Let's gather what we've uncovered. The Stoics, from emperors to slaves, didn't see death as an enemy. They saw it as a natural transition, a return to the larger cycle of nature. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." This wasn't morbid. It was a call to integrity, a reminder that life isn't something to hoard, but to honor. Every moment can become sacred when we remember it is temporary. From Epictetus, we learned that the fear of death often disguises itself as other fears, fear of pain, failure, or rejection. But it's the same root, fear of loss, and he taught us to confront that fear by shifting our judgment. Death is not inherently bad. Pain is not evil. It's the belief that we must avoid them at all costs that creates suffering. Change your opinion, and you change your world. This is where freedom begins, not in avoiding fate, but in accepting it without complaint. Seneca, writing from within the chaos of Roman political life, showed us how philosophy becomes practice. Faced with power, wealth, and eventual betrayal, he did not cling. He wrote, "He who fears death will never do anything worth living for." These were not just words, he lived them to the very end, choosing to face death calmly when commanded to die. His final act wasn't resistance, but clarity, dignity, and coherence with his beliefs. We've also seen how this fear shows up today in how we work, how we relate to others, and how we talk to ourselves. It steals time not by taking hours from the clock, but by filling those hours with worrying. It robs presence, it distorts love, but with tools like the dichotomy of control, negative visualization, journaling, and the Stoic pause, we reclaim that time. We step out of anxious shadows and into meaningful light. We choose to live intentionally, rather than reactively. And now, at this final part of our reflection, let's return to you. to the quiet truths that only you can face. Are you living your life by design or by default? Are your days shaped by what you value or by what you fear? These are not questions for guilt, they're invitations for attention. Because nothing changes until we pay attention. And the most transformative attention is the kind that begins within. You may not control what comes tomorrow. You may not stop aging, illness, or loss. But you can always ask, how do I want to meet it? The Stoics never asked us to be fearless robots. They asked us to be awake, awake enough to know when fear is lying. Awake enough to know when fear is keeping us small. Awake enough to say, this fear will not decide how I show up today. In that choice, you take your life back. Now, picture a single leaf falling from a tree. It doesn't resist the wind. It doesn't argue with gravity. It simply dances its way to the ground. That is nature's way, quiet, patient, without panic. The Stoics taught us to live and die with the same grace. Not to cling, not to demand more days, but to let each one be enough. Enough to speak kindly, enough to do good work, enough to see, to breathe, to be. Let's imagine for a moment that this day was your last. Not in a fearful way, but in a focusing one. What would you notice? The sunlight on your skin, the voice of a loved one, the taste of your tea. These small, often dismissed sensations are the building blocks of a full life. The Stoics didn't ask us to chase grand legacies. They asked us to be present with what is. Because life, as Seneca said, is long enough if you know how to use it. That's the paradox, isn't it? We fear death will take away our life, when in truth, it's often fear itself that takes it first. Fear of not being enough, fear of missing out, fear of being forgotten. But the Stoics didn't try to become unforgettable. They tried to become undisturbed. They sought peace not by making life longer but by making it deeper. Through discipline, through virtue, through the quiet joy of enough. So let us ask the question one last time, not to answer it, but to live with it. What are you afraid of? Is it the end or the chance that you might reach it without ever having begun? The truth is, you don't need more time, you need more presence. You need the courage to stop running and start noticing. Because the fear of death loses its grip the moment you start truly living. Let this video be more than information. Let it be a mirror, a gentle one. Ask yourself, what would change if I lived like each day was not guaranteed? Not in panic, but in purpose, not in scarcity, but in presence. Because the days are passing, with or without our attention. But how we meet them, that is ours to decide. And now we reach our final reflection. Picture yourself not as a victim of time, but as its companion. You don't control the wind, but you can adjust your sails. You don't command the sea, but you can choose how you move through it. Life isn't a war against death, it's a dance with change. And every moment you say yes to life, death becomes less frightening because you are already doing the thing it threatens to take. Let us end with the words of Marcus Aurelius. It is not death that a man should fear, but never beginning to live. These words, etched across centuries, reach us now like a whisper from someone who has already walked this path. They don't promise safety. They offer something better, the power to begin again, right here, in this breath. Thank you for walking this journey with us. See you in the next meditation.